I'll say the biggest thing that I've learned that has really changed me and helped me become a success at doing what I do is don't be afraid to ask for help. I have hired business coaches. I've hired a coach to help me build my website. I hired a coach to help me become a better podcaster. I hired a coach to teach me how to be a retailer and how to promote my retail store. And with each one of those things where I've been, I guess, humble enough really to say, you know what, I don't really know what I'm doing here, so I'm going to go find someone who does. That has been incredibly valuable for me.
Welcome to the Richer Soul podcast, where we share how to live in harmony across health, wealth, time, relationships, and spirituality. How do you bring them all together to live your ultimate life? The best thing is we've got nothing to sell, just great advice from people who've succeeded and lived that dream. Welcome to Richer Soul, Jared St. Clair. It's great to have you join us today.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
I'm excited to learn from you. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
That's an interesting question. So growing up I had a great childhood. Nothing that I can complain about at all. Two wonderful parents. And I did grow up weird, for sure. My parents owned a health food store from the time I was 5 years old. So I had the strangest looking sack lunches amongst all the children. My dad wasn't a big fan of public education, so I went to a little tiny private school where I had the opportunity to do some things I wouldn't have otherwise been able to do, like be on the basketball team, even though I was only 5'6", and also ended up being the student body president, which was by appointment, not election. So it wasn't a popularity contest. But as far as money goes, I grew up, I would say, with a very capitalistic way of looking at things, for sure. My dad was kind of a serial entrepreneur, had his hands in a lot of different things, although it was always in the natural wellness space. He worked on the wholesale side of the supplement industry for some of the major manufacturers in this country, and eventually opened up his own business called Bridgecrest Herbals about 35 years ago now. And so we had the little family health store, which is the store that I now own, that I bought from them 31 years ago. And then I was very familiar with what was going on in the industry from a manufacturing standpoint as well. But Dad finally hit his stride financially when I was in my late teens, early 20s. So grew up where we were just kind of scraping it together. They sent us to private school out of a real desire to do it, not because they could necessarily afford it all that well. And I do feel like I did grow up in an environment where I always believed that we could kind of figure it out financially, but it always felt like we were pretty tight.
Well, and I would think usually, because when you have entrepreneurial parents, you tend to see money closer, only because sometimes the family is talking about business and what's happening in the business. And instead of like the steady income, you get to experience the up and downs a little bit more than others do. And so it's an interesting journey growing up in that type of.
Yeah, definitely. We had leaner years and, better years as far as that goes. There were summers with family vacations and summers without, that sort of thing.
So you took over the family store at a pretty young age. Did they teach you how to run it and how to do the business side of the business, or was it more the other side?
The funny thing is, I started working in the store when I was 7 years old, a couple of years after it opened. And, I was just stocking shelves and putting tags on things and, dumping the garbage and that kind of thing. But by the time I was 14 years old, the rule was, I had two older brothers, and the rule had been that once we turned 14, I don't know why my dad picked that age, but that was when we could actually start working with the customers and helping them find things and answering questions and things like that. And I really caught the bug as a kid. By 13, 14 years old, I was very interested in what we were doing and really enjoyed working with customers, even though most of them would come in and see a 14-year-old kid and assume I didn't know anything. And frankly, I didn't know much at 14. I knew a whole lot more than my friends did about this stuff, but not nearly as much as my parents did, of course. But there was this challenge of trying to be able to answer these adult questions, we'll say, about health and nutrition. And I really relished that. I loved it. So I was excited about it from a very young age. And at 15, my mom never wanted to work in the store. She really wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but the store wasn't making any money. And so it was always a little side hustle kind of a thing. And so they saw my energy for it and my excitement for it. And they asked me if I wanted to run the store. So I started managing it when I was 15. I'd ride my bike. I didn't have a license yet, right? So I'd ride my bike down after school. I worked there every Saturday. And we were closed on Sundays. And so I worked from like 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock every night, and then Saturday every day or every week. And I hired my first employee when I was 16 years old. And she ended up staying with me for 20 years. And so that's how it started. And then at 22 years old, my dad, as I was saying, kind of hit his stride with his other business and just really didn't want to take the time to try to run both things. And at that point, he asked me if I was interested in buying it. And so that's how I ended up owning it.
Interesting. So, did you feel confident to run it at that point, or were you still learning how to run a business?
Oh, I think I probably felt more confident than I should have. But it was a very small, pretty simple business back then. We had a footprint of like 400 square feet that we were working in, and we were doing $300 or $400 a day. Literally helping somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 customers a day back then. So it wasn't a very challenging business to run. I guess maybe for a 15-year-old, but compared to what we're doing now, there weren't a whole lot of things that I deal with now that I dealt with back then. But the energy behind it for me was I just loved those one-on-one interactions and helping somebody with something and helping educate them on what it might do for them. And then having them come back and report back to me and let me know if they were getting the results they were looking for. And it doesn't take very many people coming back saying, hey, this really helped me, to give you a real shot in the arm in terms of really wanting to keep pushing that forwards. That's how I caught the bug, and I've had it ever since. I just told my team, we had our first, we're recording this the second week of January, and I wrote a letter to my team here at Vitality Nutrition, and I said, at 53 years old, I've owned this place for 31 years. I've worked here for 45 years, and I'm more excited about what we do today than I've ever been. It's just such a fun thing to be involved in, and such a great gift to be able to provide something that is not just an exchange of time for money, but really the promise of vitality. And we love what we do.
Out of curiosity, because when you started that store back then, information wasn't available on the internet.
There was no internet.
There was no internet. So
Yep.
how were you able to figure out what's right? Because it was very difficult to get information or to get access to medical journals unless you happen to be next to a medical school or have the ability through other sorts of ways of finding that stuff.
Well, and beyond that, even if you had access to that, nobody was studying natural stuff back then. So there were medical schools studying things, but primarily they were studying drugs, not nutraceuticals. And so it really was a lot of tradition. There was much more in the anecdotal evidence than there was in the actual clinical evidence. Of course, now we know there's a lot of evidence that supplements and nutrition matter and how they can help us. But we relied a lot on books back then. One of my favorite books, maybe still my favorite book because it had such a great impact on me as a child, is a book by Robert Mendelsohn called How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor. And that was a book that my dad read and used a lot of what he learned there in terms of how he wanted to raise his kids. And even when I became an adult and had my first child at 26 years old, I also leaned on that book and found that there was a ton of excellent information on there, and in there, probably at that point, still more than there really was on the internet, because the internet was still pretty young back then. So yeah, lots of books. The How to Herb book. There was a great book called Prescription for Natural Healing. Lots of really great stuff that was written on paper, the old-fashioned way, and we relied a lot on that.
What were some of those core tenets in how to raise a healthy child?
Well, there was a lot of, he has another book, maybe my second favorite book, called Confessions of a Medical Heretic. And he was a guy who was a regular MD and saw a lot of holes in the system as a young MD and decided that he wanted to, kind of strike out on his own and figure out if he could do it better, essentially. So he challenged a lot of the kind of regular ways of doing things. He talked a lot about, why it doesn't make sense to go to a doctor just because you're child has a sore throat or a runny nose or sinus congestion or those types of things, and that well child visits maybe aren't as good as they've been cracked up to be for various reasons. So there was a lot of that kind of thing. And like I said, his other book, which I think actually came out before the How to Raise a Healthy Child book, Confessions of a Medical Heretic, he essentially was saying, look, I'm challenging all this dogma because I personally have seen with my patients that it isn't working and we need to do something different. And so a lot of his positions are quite the opposite of what, the AMA and the FDA were pushing, and in many cases still are pushing.
And I don't know if people realize this. Back then, the doctor was an individual. What I mean by that is he had his own private practice. He could say and do what he wanted. Today, your average doctor does not have the right to say and do as he wants. He must say and do and practice medicine in line with how he gets paid a bonus, which is driven by the institution. And so the vaccine schedule isn't because it's the best schedule. It's because that is the best way to ensure that the drug companies get all the doses done. Because after age 5, chances of a well visit drop dramatically for kids. And so everything was designed more around serving the lowest common denominator instead of, if we've got healthy kids who don't have all these issues, there's absolutely no reason for a Hep B shot on day 1 of birth. And I had to argue with our doctor about it. And I'm like, well, what are the risk factors? And I'm like, yeah, none of those apply to me. So why do we do this? And if you stand up, you got it. I don't know what it's like today. I hear it's much worse in trying to work your way through the system.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, we have the big Maha movement that caught a lot of steam, with the last election. And regardless of where you fall on the political side of things are shifting for sure. The vaccine schedule itself just got massively reworked. Dietary guidelines just got massively reworked. So there's some interesting stuff going on. The problem is we have this polarization in America where if it comes from the quote unquote right or comes from the quote unquote left, then half the country hates it, regardless of whether or not it has any logic behind it, right? And so, one of the most clear examples of that is when it was Trump's COVID vaccine, the right was generally on board and the left was scared to death. And when the exact same vaccine rolled out under Biden, everything switched. And yet the vaccine didn't change. It was just the guy pushing it, right? And so we've got a lot of, in healthcare where it should absolutely not be political, it is very, very political. And that really kind of all happened with COVID to a large degree. And so it behooves us all, I think, to step outside of that political, I don't know what the word is, the side that we're on, if we're on a side, and look at it for what it actually is and make an informed decision based on that, not based on, who's in office.
Only because I've been out of the game. Art, what do you see as the trust level towards the medical community these days? Has it dropped since COVID, or is it relatively the same?
Eroded substantially. And the way that I can say, first off, I pay a lot of attention to this stuff because, it is what I do, but also I get a lot of what I would consider to be the sort of disaffected people over at Vitality Nutrition. And, my business is interesting. People that don't know me, I have my brick and mortar store that we've already talked about that's been in the family for, 48 years now, almost 49 years. And then we have our website, vitalitynutrition.com, and I have my podcast, Vitality Radio. The coolest thing about having a physical site is that we actually get to see real people and have real conversations, right? And for years, we've had those conversations, and I have met so many thousands of people that feel a certain way about their doctor, about their specialist, about their health food store guy. And many of the people that walk in our door have been to enough doctors without the success that they're looking for or without feeling like they're being heard. And in oftentimes almost being fear-mongered into a specific way of doing things that they're sick of it and they move towards an alternative. And we provide a lot of that alternative. And the problem there is too, I don't feel like it should be an alternative. I think it should just be part of the options that we have, right? Because there's nothing wrong with relying on a doctor for things that doctors can do. And there's nothing wrong with relying on your local expert at the supplement shop for his level of expertise, and potentially being able to use both to optimize your health. But it seems that even in that area, in many cases, we're kind of forced to pick a side, or feel like we're forced to pick a side. But over the last few years, we certainly are seeing an influx of people who are very frustrated, who've lost faith in the system, who no longer believe that their doctor has been educated in the way that he or she needs to be. And it's not so much that they don't think their doctor is a good person trying to do good things. They question the education level of the doctor and what's happening in medical school and the influence of pharma on the doctor's practice.
And there's a whole lot of all of that. I'm very familiar with all of it. And it has continued, I'll say, to get worse over the years. Medical school has always had a problem: ego.
Mm-hmm.
And
Ego and
because of
influence.
that, you couldn't challenge anything
Yeah.
as a learner, which the entire concept of learning is to truly challenge the learning. And if you can't do that, that's a major problem. In addition, I don't know that the curriculum per se has changed. I don't know the curriculum, but I would bet it hasn't changed in 100 years in the sense of subjects and focus. I think just now they're starting to bring diet into it, but most physicians aren't going to have a conversation about food. There's a certain, what would I call it? I don't know if code is the right word, but if I go to my internal medicine and then I see the cardiologist, the internal medicine isn't going to challenge the cardiologist. And the cardiologist isn't going to challenge the pulmonologist. And the pulmonologist isn't going to challenge the endocrinologist. And all three of those people are going to put you on a drug that screws up one of the other person's things. And
Very
if
possible.
nobody is managing the whole picture, which very few are, then you end up in your shop.
Yeah, and it really is a shame, and I see that play out all the time. I mean, you nailed it right on the head, because we have this situation too where in modern medicine today in America, we treat the body like it's a bunch of individual parts. And so you already mentioned half of them, right? Well, half of them, several of them: pulmonology and cardiology and endocrinology and so on. And yet the lungs don't function without the heart, and the heart doesn't function without the lungs, and we're treating it like they're individual machines, but they're all part of one machine. And so when you look at functional medicine, to a large degree, you'll run into doctors who are looking at the entire body and really taking that holistic approach. Not to say that every functional medicine doctor is a great doctor. We got good and bad in every area of life, for sure. But at least the idea is that their practice is designed to look at the person as a whole, and not just what's happening with the cardiovascular system alone. And I just saw this play out with someone close to me who is, well, someone close to me. I don't have a lot of influence, we'll say. But the story is essentially someone with pretty crippling anxiety and depression, and went to their regular MD, their generalist, and was prescribed a drug, Abilify, and specifically came in and said, my primary concern is anxiety. I'm having anxiety that gets me to the point where I can't function. I'm having anxiety attacks, things like that. And the number one most common side effect of Abilify, for one thing, is anxiety. It's really more of an antidepressant than it is an anti-anxiety drug. Person then decided to go to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist did not challenge the MD, exactly what you said, put the person on 2 additional drugs, neither of which, in my view, make any sense for what he was dealing with. And rather than making an adjustment to the Abilify in a way that would make sense, because he went to the psychiatrist because he was having increased anxiety, he actually increased the dose of the Abilify, as well as putting him on 2 other drugs. When he decided he didn't want to be on that drug, the psychiatrist said, I think that's a good idea. So the patient led the decision to get off of the drug, instead of the prescribing doctor saying, hey, I think this isn't working for you. It's the craziest thing. Well, it's not the craziest thing. I've seen crazier, but a lot of that's going on. And we have a very short amount of time, typically, with these doctors. They've got a prescription pad at the ready. Many of them are like Wyatt Earp with the prescription pad. Oh, it's a quick draw and sign and send you out the door. And in so many cases, they don't even know why they're prescribing the drug. It's not even a logical prescription. So there's a lot of issues going on in that area, for sure.
I just sat down with my doctor for my quarterly appointment, and we spent an hour just going over blood tests, things that I wanted to know about, picking a plan, looking at different things, yes, no's, and all of that. But you have to make the choice to put yourself in that type of situation and get out of the standard complex that's out there.
Yeah.
You know, speaking of emotional vitality, I think you learned a lot about that with your now wife. Would you be willing to share that story?
Yeah, for sure. And so I don't forget, I'll preface this with saying that if what I'm about to say resonates with you, I have a series of episodes on my podcast called Jen's Story, Jens. Jen is my wife. I met my wife almost exactly 8 years ago now. It'll be 8 years in March. And we're both coming out of a divorce. And so it was a tough time in both of our lives, as I'm sure many people can relate to. And she was in a much bigger hole than I would say. She had dealt with anxiety and depression since she was 13 years old. She was one of the youngest and first people to ever be put on Prozac as a 13-year-old. And, she's now 52. So that's a long time ago. And she had been on a psych med or multiple psych meds almost her entire life up to the point where I met her 8 years ago. And she had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And she had spent, she had been in an accident and created a lot of issues, chronic pain in her back, and was put on an opiate and was told by her doctor, this is a new medicine, a new pain medicine that is not addictive. And he put her on that medicine, and she happened to be one of those people that one dose was enough, and she was addicted to that for 10 years. So she had spent a tremendous amount of her life in a bad position with pharma. And yet when I met her, so she got through 10 years of addiction. She'd been clean from the opiates for, I want to say 7 years or 8 years when I met her. But that was after a couple of suicide attempts. So her life was in a bit of a shambles, to say the least. She was a single mom now with 4 kids, 3 of them being dependents. And we met online. And so we were, looking for somebody. And the reason I can tell you all this about her and be very transparent about her life is because she wants her life to be an open book so that people can learn from her situation and her mistakes, which is why we've done this series of shows. And that first night that we talked on the phone, she told me her story. And she admits now, and I realized it then, that she was trying to scare me away because she thought I sounded like a pretty good guy, and the last thing I would want was someone like her. But what I saw was like this incredibly authentic human being that was so clearly who she was versus everybody else I'd met on a dating app who felt like they were putting on a show, that I thought, I really like this person. No way I'm marrying her. She's in bad shape. So probably not interested in that, but there's something beautiful about this human being. And I knew enough about supplementation and nutrition that I felt like I could help her. And so we became fast friends, and it was just going to be friends, my choice. But I started helping her with her severe IBS that she was dealing with. And I started helping her with her depression and anxiety. And I started helping her with her chronic pain. And she was making a lot of progress in these areas. And we recognized at a certain point where one of the things I did is I challenged her and I said, you're not bipolar. And she said, yes, I am. And I said, no, you're not. And she said, yes, I am. I know I'm bipolar because not only have I been diagnosed, but they put me on medicine that helps. I've researched it and it matches my symptoms. And I said, okay, I get that you have symptoms that are bipolar disorder symptoms, but you've got to recognize that you as a human being are not bipolar. It's a condition, and it's a condition that you can change. And she thought I was nuts. And honestly, I think that happened in our second conversation. She thought I was crazy. She said, there's no way I'll ever be off my meds. I am bipolar. She essentially had admitted defeat and that she was beyond fixing. And yet she was willing to let me help her feel better than she did, but she thought she would never feel good. Well, fast forward, we've been married for 2 years. She's the most amazing human being I've ever met. And she has been off of her pharma meds now for about 6 years, 6.5 years. Took her about 1.5 years to get off of them after she told me that would never happen. After she got off of them and had not been off of them for decades, she said she never felt so clear and so alive as she did after she finally dropped that last medicine, which was a long and cautious weaning process that she went through. And she is now someone who, no matter how hard life can come at her, she doesn't deal with anxiety and depression anymore. And she just doesn't. But it wasn't supplementation and it wasn't diet. It was supplementation, diet, and mindset. And we call it vitality, the mindset piece, emotional vitality. She and I dug into it to get ourselves unstuck. I say she was in a deeper hole when it comes to depression and anxiety, but I'd been divorced for a second time at that point. My life from a business standpoint was kind of going okay, but my life in other ways, I was super stuck. And honestly, with my ego, I thought we were doing the emotional vitality stuff for her. But as we went into it and we did it together, boy, was I amazed at how much it benefited me and how much more, for lack of a better term, I guess, grounded and centered I became and willing and able to progress and do the things that I really wanted to do with my life that I had been holding myself back from. So we spend a lot of time on mindset. Now we actually teach it through the podcast. We do these episodes called Emotional Vitality. And it's been the most beautiful thing because we went through the entire thing together and we've learned the same concepts together. And now we have this relationship that I can't compare to anything else that I've ever seen. And I think a huge part of that is because we work down that same path together. And now we just love sharing it with people because it's so beautiful.
Curiosity, how did you know that she didn't have those conditions? I think the bipolar. How did you know that it wasn't that?
Well, to be clear, I don't believe that if it has a D on the end of it and it has to do with mental health, D meaning disorder. So ADHD, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, I'm trying to think, MDD, any of these types of disorders that are in the DSM, the big red book on disorders. I believe that one of the biggest fallacies in medicine is that we are disordered. There is disease for sure. And there is malfunction of the human body and the neurological system. But I don't believe that in the vast majority of cases, we're actually broken. What I believe is that we have a set of symptoms that has arisen from a combination of inputs, and I'll say inputs like toxins in our environment, deficiencies because people aren't nourishing their body the way they should because our diet in America is horrifyingly bad and most people aren't supplementing or not supplementing well or wisely. And on top of that, we have all of these inputs that have been given to us by other people in terms of how we feel about ourselves and inputs that we've given ourselves. Jen, in her case, had been raised like all of us to believe very specific things that she'd learned from her parents, her family members, her teachers, the television, and so on and so forth. And we all have these maps that's what we call them anyway, maps that we travel down that largely were instilled for us. And we have to learn to dig into our subconscious and reroute those maps to take us to where we want to be. And so my feeling was that her bipolar was almost, and this was after many conversations with her as we dug into this, was a combination of she has the MTHFR mutation or variant, which if people haven't heard of that, we'd need 2 other shows to try and conquer that one. But it's a real problem with how the body metabolizes certain B vitamins and detoxifies the body. So we were able to determine that. She also had severe gut dysbiosis. She'd been on massive quantities of antibiotics as a child because of multiple ear infections and strep throat and all these types of things. Her microbiome was wiped out. The gut and the brain are critically connected. And if the gut doesn't work, the brain doesn't work like it should. And she was extremely malnourished. She ate a very typical American diet of mostly hyper-processed foods. And so she didn't have the nutrition that she needed. Her mother was a nurse and raised her primarily on pharmaceuticals and a lot of processed food, which unfortunately is a lot of people in America. I would dare say most people in America. And so what I saw was a lot of deficiency, a lot of toxicity, a gut microbiome that was wrecked, and an inability to detoxify the body efficiently because of MTHFR. And if you put those things on top of each other, that can very much equal bipolar disorder. So then we look at, okay, well, how do we unravel all that? Well, we fill the deficiencies, we eliminate the toxicities, we change the diet so the body is actually getting nourished and not poisoned, and we work on getting the gut biome where it should be. So those were all the things we initially did. And she made great progress, but she was very stuck at a certain point before she decided she was willing to tackle the mindset side and her limiting beliefs on could she actually be happy and healthy on a regular basis. And once she was willing to challenge those beliefs, then everything shifted.
It's amazing how it's all connected. And I don't believe any of those questions or comments are on the doctor's intake orders.
Exactly. No, they're not. No, they're not.
They're not.
Yep.
Well, congratulations for standing up,
Well,
challenging it.
The coolest thing about it is that it's, for years I've been helping strangers with this stuff. And, I'm not the be all end all of natural medicine. I know a lot about it for sure. I'm a well-educated person and I teach it on my podcast and in my store and everything else. But this one was the most beautiful story that I can tell because it happened to end up being the love of my life. And watching her transform over that period of time was so beautiful. And then not just to watch that, but watch how it impacted her kids, how it now impacts her grandkids. It's her relationships with her siblings, with her parents. It's so beautiful. And we love to share her story because there are so many people that are so stuck and they do think that they're broken, that they're beyond repair, that they're only going to be able to manage symptoms. And modern medicine lies to us about that. It does say that we are symptoms to be managed, not people to be healed. And I just absolutely refuse that way of thinking. It's just simply not true.
And I'm with you on that. Is there anything else kind of on the dangers of pharmaceuticals that we didn't touch on through those examples?
Yeah, I mean, that's another one we could spend lots of shows on, but I'll touch on one that I think is really, really important because it's not universal, but there are millions of people in this country that are on these things on a regular basis, and they're PPIs, proton pump inhibitors. So these are drugs like Nexium, Prilosec, Prevacid, these types of things, and many of them are over the counter now. Most of them started as and PPIs are really interesting, and that's the one area of pharmacy because I grew up. I said at the very beginning of the show, I grew up weird. I didn't know what aspirin was until I was 18 years old. We just didn't do that stuff in my house. And so I had to learn about drugs through my customers because we never experienced them at the St. Clair household. But PPIs I did learn about as about a 25, 26 years old. When I was in a position in my life where I was in severe stress, I had this business of Vitality Nutrition, and then I also had another business that I had bought thinking that I could do both. I don't know, maybe I thought that because of my dad. That other business was failing miserably. I was at the highest stress I'd ever been. I was on the road constantly. I was ignoring everything I'd been taught as a child and eating very horribly. And so the combination of severe stress and poor diet, I ended up with the worst case of acid reflux that you could imagine. My GI doc who ran the scope and looked at my esophagus said, this is one of the worst cases I've ever seen. And I do 800 of these things a year. And so at 26 years old, he wanted to put me on Nexium. That was the brand new purple pill that had just come out. That's 27 years ago now. And retrospect, hindsight, maybe I should have taken that for a couple of months to calm everything down because that's actually how those drugs should be used. The FDA's never approved any of them for over 12 weeks of continuous use. So if you're on a PPI, and you've been on it for over 12 weeks, that's against the recommendations of the FDA, even if your doctor's okay with it. And the reason they're not recommended long-term is because they cause significant deficiency in your body's ability to digest and absorb nutrients from your food. And so after 10 years on a PPI, there are multiple studies that have been done that indicate that you may have as high what's the word I'm looking for? An increase of as high as 25% likelihood of death from all causes from being on a PPI for 10 years or more. Because it reduces your body's ability to absorb minerals, which reduces your body's ability to build bones. It increases the risk of hip fractures and vertebral fractures dramatically. And on top of that, there's a myriad of other issues because if we can't digest our food, we can't get nutrition from our food. If we can't get nutrition from our food, then we become depleted across the board in all kinds of things. And the problem is it doesn't resolve anything. We still have acid reflux. It's just we can't feel it because we're not making any more acid. And if we try to come off of these drugs, especially if we try not to wean off of them, we'll end up with what's called the reflux rebound. And it can be almost crippling in terms of the level of pain and discomfort that can create. So one of the things that I've kind of been on a crusade for the last 26 years since I figured out how to heal acid reflux, because I healed my own in about a 4-month period of time, is to help people learn how to get their digestive systems in order so that they never have to be on one of those drugs again.
I like it. I've never been a fan of most of those meds other than short-term relief. You know,
It's
if
the
something
only
comes
way
up.
they make sense is short term.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. Let's kind of shift gears here to supplements. So I don't know that I've ever shared my supplement stack, but I'm just going to whip through it. I take taurine, I take magnesium, and I learned with magnesium, there's different kinds of magnesium, and the type of magnesium you take makes a big difference. I bought the wrong kind to begin with. Because of my age and changes, I'm on Glynac, so it's glycine and NAC, CoQ10, D3K lithium, a Super B. I take collagen. I take creatine because I lift. I don't know if it does anything, but I take
Creatine has more research than any other supplement. So if you want one that's got evidence, creatine's the one.
I take omega 3s and 6s, and then I take folic acid. I think that's the majority of my stack. I'd love to hear what you think and what you might recommend to people, or where is it that we really should optimize. And the other thing, and this is what I don't think people realize, your stack depends on your age. Right? My stack is because of my age. And there are certain things that as the body ages, it doesn't do as well as it used to. So that's why I'm taking certain things. If I were 35, I wouldn't be on this stack. I'd be on something totally different, or maybe not a lot. But as you get older, you have to make up for what the body is slowly not doing and maybe what I've disrepaired over the years.
For sure. And the biggest challenge with all of this is nothing's universal, right? Your body's going to respond to whatever it's going to respond to in the way that your body is going to respond to it. And so, your stack isn't my stack, even if we're both, the same age, relatively similar health status. Even then, it's not the same. There are some things, though, that are relatively universal, never totally universal, but relatively universal. And one of the things, so my podcast is about 6 years old now, but I've been doing my show for 18, 19 years now as a local radio show for years before it ever became a podcast. And so for that 19 years, the most common question I have had is from people who are kind of new to supplementation. They heard me on the radio. In most cases, because it was a radio, not a podcast, they heard me by accident. They were trying to listen to the Utah Jazz on the same network, but they weren't on, and I was. And so they're listening to this guy talking about vitamins or herbs or whatever. So I had these unsuspecting people that would come into Vitality Nutrition and say, hey, I walk into your store and there's 5,000 different bottles here. What the heck am I supposed to do? How do I start? And there's a lot of overwhelm with supplementation for people, especially now in the internet age, because the marketing of supplements is massive, right? There's billions of dollars being spent just marketing this stuff. And so I've had all these people ask basically the same question, and that is, where do I start? How do I know that, what I'm supposed to take? And because I had some people coming in at 65 years old and saying that, and other people coming in at 35 years old and saying that, I wanted to try and come up with something that was as universal as possible, that just kind of covered the bases as a starting point. And then you work from there depending on your age, your health status, possibly your health history with your family, if you have more likelihood of heart disease or cancer, those types of things. And so I came up with what I call my Vital Five. And the Vital Five is basically the 5 supplements that I think most adults over about 35 years old, and the reason it's 35, I can explain in just a moment, is because of what you said with age. Some things we don't need as much when we're younger. And so the Vital Five are omega 3s, which you mentioned, magnesium, which you mentioned. Magnesium is the one, maybe the most universal supplement that there is, because our ancestors 100 years ago were getting about 600 milligrams in our diet. In their diets, we get about 200-ish milligrams in our diet. So we're all about 400 milligrams depleted. And magnesium is the stress mineral. And the higher level of stress we have, the more magnesium we use, and therefore the more magnesium we need. So if we're all starting in a deficit at 400, some of us may need 500 or 600 milligrams to get back to where we need, depending on our stress level. And my favorite magnesium, that again, not totally universal, because there are great forms of magnesium out there for certain things, but magnesium bisglycinate, I think, is the superior form for most people. And then we have great multivitamin. And I mention that because multivitamins are the best base coverers, we'll say. You mentioned to me before the show that you take a lot of the stuff that's in a multivitamin just parsed out in individual products. And a lot of people choose to do that. I've done that most of my life, taken, the individual things as well. But to simplify things, if you can get a really good multivitamin, you can simplify things and cover a lot of gaps in your diet. And we have a vitamin that I developed years ago called Ultimate Vitality Multi that I think covers it as well as anything out there. And I always preface it with that great word, because most multivitamins on the market, in my opinion, are not just not great, but they're probably not even worth taking. One of my most popular episodes of my show is called Centrum Sucks. And it's the most simple name for any show that I've ever done. It's just 2 words. And I call it that because Centrum is the #1 selling multivitamin in the world. And I think it's one of the worst multivitamins in the world. And it's brought to you by our good friends at Pfizer. So, if you trust your local drug company with your supplements, you might want to do a little more research on that. And then I always recommend probiotics because of everything I said with the microbiome with my wife, but also so many other reasons with your immune system and your digestive health and all that, and digestive enzymes. And the digestive enzymes are kind of the 35-year-old thing, because most of us are making enough enzymes until that age. Very few of us are making enough enzymes after 35 or 40 years old. And digestive enzymes are massive when it comes to your body's ability to utilize nutrition from your food. So they play a role in not just digestion and calming the gut and making the process of digestion and elimination more smooth, but they also help us with more nutrition because we're getting more of everything from our food if we take it with the presence of digestive enzymes. So that's like this just nice kind of, again, semi-universal starting point. But then if you also have arthritis, you might recommend, you might do something like collagen or glucosamine or those types of things. If you also have high blood pressure, you might do something that's going to increase your nitric oxide. If you also are dealing with, what's another one, brain fog, you may use something specific to the brain like lion's mane or methylene blue or those types of things. So we like the baseline of the Vital 5, and then we branch out from there if it makes sense.
Nice. I've seen lion's mane, but I've never actually, I don't know if I've taken it. I'm not totally familiar with all of the properties of it and what it exactly does.
Yeah, the basics on it are that it helps to enhance nerve growth factor. And, there was, I know you remember this, probably most of your listeners remember this. We used to be told as kids that if you kill off your brain cells, they don't grow back. Well, we now know that that's not the case. We're making neurons all the time, or at least have the potential to make neurons. But lion's mane actually has been clinically proven to help the body make more neurons. And so lion's mane is not the kind of thing you take a couple capsules of when you're struggling with your memory or your focus. It's the kind of thing you take over time that after a month or two, most people start to see benefit from it. And one of the things that it's been shown to do is to increase BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is that thing that's firing when you're trying to remember where you put your car keys, or why the heck you walked into this room, or what was that guy's name again? That sort of thing. So lots of people love lion's mane because it's pretty experiential. Once you've been on it for a while, most people can actually feel a difference or notice a difference mentally.
Interesting. I will have to check that one out. It's not one that I have spent enough time on.
I'll tell you a little secret about it too that nobody ever thinks about or talks about, but all of the medicinal mushrooms are also fantastic prebiotics. So you get this side benefit of prebiotic fiber from the mushroom so regardless of whether you're using shiitake or reishi or lion's mane or any of those, taking the fiber itself is actually good for your gut. And they all have an innate ability to help let's say balance and modulate the immune response. And so all of those mushrooms also can help with prevention of colds and flus and things like that.
They also have this pretty cool network underground that they all communicate
the
through.
Mycelium. Yeah. That's fascinating stuff there.
It's a whole fascinating thing and a whole different conversation.
Yep.
But I think we forget how nature kind of comes together and what all these things really are.
Indeed.
Which leads me to my next question. I can go on Amazon and buy all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I can go on Amazon and I don't know what the hell I'm getting.
Yeah.
Meaning, even though the label says X, between the fraud and the bad manufacturing, I guess, I don't know. This is your area.
Well,
it's a struggle.
I'm glad you brought it up because there's a lot to this, and to give you a really thorough answer to this question, it would be more than the 10 minutes or so that we have left. But I'll give you the basics. The two biggest things with Amazon right now are counterfeits, which is going to be obviously fraud. And what I mean by counterfeits is you're ordering a bottle from a specific brand. that you believe is a good brand, and maybe they are a good brand, you're actually getting a bottle from someone else with a counterfeit label on it. It's not what you think it is. It's got the right UPC code. The bottle looks the same. The capsule may even look the same, but it's not coming from that manufacturer. And that's happening on a fairly regular basis on Amazon. Go ahead.
How do you know?
Well, this is the hard part. And I can tell you what I know, and I can tell you what I've heard. And I don't know if the heard part is true. We have all these Amazon warehouses spread out across the country, right? So everybody can get their stuff in 1 or 2 days. And if you have, I'll just pick a brand that a lot of people have heard of. There's a brand called Solaray, a very reputable brand of vitamins here in Utah that I've worked with for 40 years. My dad used to be the vice president of that company years ago. And Solaray is a great brand. They cross all the T's and dot all the I's. I trust them very, very much, and I sell a lot of their products. But if someone wants to counterfeit a Solaray product, they can, we're in the modern age. Technology is not that tough. You can throw a label into ChatGPT and say, make me a version of this, and print it on your home printer and wrap it around a bottle, right? This is something literally anybody could do. And it can look almost the same or even exactly the same as the Solaray product. And so on Amazon, they will have, and a lot of people are familiar with this, the seller that is the brand. So it might say, visit the Solaray store, and you click on that store. And what has been the case, according to what I've been told, is that if you click on the Solaray store, that means that product came from the Solaray warehouse to the Amazon warehouse and then gets shipped to you. However, I've also been told that if you have multiple sellers on Amazon that are selling that Solaray product, and you've got a facility, an Amazon warehouse in Salt Lake City, Utah, right next to where I am, all the bottles that have that UPC code go in the same bucket. And I don't know if that's true. And if that is true, and there's multiple different sellers on Amazon selling the thing, some of the bottles in that bucket could be counterfeit, some could not. Now, truth be told, the vast majority of stuff on Amazon is not counterfeit product. Most of it's legit, but you don't know when it isn't. It's kind of a Russian roulette situation. And so we don't know on that. And so if only one seller is selling it on Amazon, if there is only Solaray selling it, it probably isn't counterfeit. But if more than one are selling it, it's a crapshoot. So that's the first thing. The other thing that's happening, and this is far more, well, I don't know if it's more insidious. They're both pretty awful. But this one is more common, is probably the better way to put it. And that is, you'll have, say, berberine. Lots of people in your audience have heard of berberine. It's the most popular herb along with ashwagandha out there. It's a compound from an herb, but regardless, berberine and ashwagandha are the two biggest selling herbal supplements in America right now. And there are companies in my industry that are trying to police this because this is really important. The FDA knows this is happening. Amazon knows this is happening. Amazon and the FDA are choosing not to do anything about it. They can, but they're not. Now, you make of that what you want, but to me, it means that Amazon is just happy to take your dollar regardless of whether they're selling you something authentic or not. That's what it seems like to me. And the FDA doesn't seem to want to protect you too much when it comes to supplementation. So those are the two things that I've drawn conclusions on from that information. But they know this is happening. So there's a company in my industry called Now Foods. They're a legitimate company, and they have chosen to buy 30 bottles-ish of berberine. And the other one they did was, it wasn't ashwagandha. Shoot, I'm drawing a blank now. Anyway, berberine was the most recent one. And so they bought 33 bottles, I believe it was, of berberine. And what they chose to do was they took it to their lab and tested it for content. And then they sent it out to a third-party lab and tested it for content as well. And all they were looking for is, does it have berberine in it? And if so, how much? That's all they were looking for. And what they found was about 95% of those products did not have the total amount of berberine that was claimed on the label. I believe in the berberine case, and I didn't come prepared with this specific data, but I think there were 8 of the 33 products that had 0 berberine in. And there were something like 15 or 16 that had less than half of what the berberine claim was in the bottle. So there's a few issues with that. The first one is you're not getting what you're paying for. The second one is you don't know what you are getting in its place. Hopefully nothing dangerous, but you're wasting your money or getting ripped off. And so if you choose to buy your supplements on Amazon, I would look how many companies are selling the supplement. Find a reputable company that you can figure out is reputable through seeing it in other places besides Amazon. That's really important. If you can only find it on Amazon, do not trust that brand. If you can't find their website, if you can't find it on other reputable websites, I just would never, ever spend money on that product. So that's the first thing. If it is on Amazon and you think it's a reputable brand that's sold in other places, see if they're the only brand that's selling it. Probably protected that way, but I can't swear to that. But what I have decided, and I've decided this years ago, and this probably could sound self-serving part of it, because I would much prefer that every single person listening to the show, Rocky, buys all their vitamins from me, right? Obviously, I'd much rather have them buy them from me than Amazon. But the truth of the matter is, when you're talking about something you're putting in your body, you need to be careful, right? That's a really important aspect of this. You're trying to literally put something in there that's going to improve your health. The last thing you need is something that's either going to do nothing, or worse yet, do something you don't want it to do. So I think from an ethical standpoint and a sort of a greater good standpoint, if you want to put it that way, I think we need to, as citizens, just say, you know what? I'm not doing it. I'm not going to give a company my money that isn't interested in protecting me. So that doesn't mean you got to buy it from me. There's plenty of really good, reputable sellers online, and your mom and pop health food store in your town where you live is likely vetting these brands and bringing in good products for you. That's how we do it here at Vitality Nutrition. But why give your money to a company that doesn't care about you at all? That's the first thing. But then the other thing that I'm doing now is I'm always asking my consumers, people that listen to my podcast, I say, find out who's behind the brand that you're buying. If you are interested in a product from Garden of Life or Solaray or Terry Naturally or Vitality Nutrition, my brand, or whatever, just do a quick Google search or put it in ChatGPT. Who makes this brand? Who owns this company? And find out who owns it, because like New Chapter is a brand that was one of my favorite brands for years. They got bought out by Procter and Gamble. I don't want to give my vitamin money to Procter and Gamble. They're a chemical company. I'm just not interested in supporting that. I don't want to give my vitamin money to Nestle, who owns Garden of Life. I don't want my money that is designed, that I've worked hard to earn, that I want to spend with brands that are not just reputable, that are also, I hope, putting good things out into the world. I would rather choose a brand that is a supplement company that's interested in doing things that supplement companies are supposed to do. Unfortunately, there's all these multinational groups now that are buying up these supplement companies. And whenever that happens at Vitality Nutrition, we move them off our shelves and we bring in brands that we feel we can trust and that we actually want to support with our.
And so you have to do a little bit of homework, see
You
what
do.
works.
Buyer beware.
And even if, as you mentioned, you think the brand is reputable, if you're buying it on Amazon, make sure you're going to the store so that you're actually getting what you believe it to be.
Yeah.
Because these days you don't know, and I totally get that. Not easy. Trust is something that we are unfortunately losing in society, but
Indeed.
at some point it will come back around. Everything swings back and forth.
Well, especially if we take a stand and stop supporting it.
That is absolutely true. What's one truth about success you wish more people understood?
One truth about success. That's interesting. I would say that, boy, you're catching me off guard with this one. So my life has been a series of events and activities, however you want to put it, of trying to figure out how to be successful, like many of us, right? Especially in entrepreneurship. I learned at a relatively young age that I had learned how to run my business from two people who didn't know how to run my business. They weren't good retail health food store people. And they would be the first people to tell you that. They did it because they were passionate about it, not because they knew how to do it. And so I'll say the biggest thing that I've learned that has really changed me and helped me become a success at doing what I do is don't be afraid to ask for help. I have hired business coaches. I've hired a coach to help me build my website. I hired a coach to help me become a better podcaster. I hired a coach to teach me how to be a retailer and how to promote retail, my retail store. And with each one of those things where I've been, I guess, humble enough really to say, you know what, I don't really know what I'm doing here, so I'm going to go find someone who does. That has been incredibly valuable for me.
And we can't know every single answer. So
And that's the
find the
truth.
people to help you, but be careful who you listen to, right?
For
Because
sure. Yes.
they may not, and in today's world of marketing, especially, the people who sound good are usually the people who know the least.
Yeah, there's
And
a
the
lot of
people
that.
who are the really smartest aren't the ones to be found because they're not a marketer. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Authenticity. And what I mean by that is I never have felt like I was the kind of person who was a phony. that was like putting on a front necessarily. But I was always so concerned about people liking me. I was very much in the people pleaser mode, that I would not say things that I thought would impact the way somebody felt about me in a negative way. And that included even my children and spouses. And in that, trying to be liked, I found that I created more dislike and more disharmony than I ever created harmony and people actually liking me for who I actually am. As I've learned, and I've learned most of this from my wife, who I talked about earlier in the show, because she was the most authentic person I'd ever met. The two most authentic people I've ever met are my father and my wife. For whatever reason, I didn't figure it out from Dad. I always respected it from him, but I never really figured it out from him. When I saw it in action with my wife, I respected it so much, and I respected that she would tell me exactly how she felt, even if I didn't like how she felt. And that shifted things in me. And as I started to be very kind but honest about my feelings in my interpersonal relationships, it has changed things in ways that I can't even describe. And that true authenticity, not just, quote unquote, being yourself, but also being willing to tell people things that they might not like, has been very, very valuable. And my relationships where I've been willing to do that have gotten closer, not further.
We have a core value in our business. We'll tell you the truth even if you fire us.
There you go.
It's just the reality of it. You got to listen, and I don't want to be the whole holding back and not giving it to you.
Yeah.
If you were to
that was a hard lesson to learn, but I've learned it.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Okay, so I just talked to my 19-year-old stepdaughter.
There you go.
I'm going to say 19-year-old, okay? She turns 20 in 3 months, and she's in a position where a lot of 19-year-olds find themselves, kind of spinning her wheels trying to figure out what the heck she's going to do with the rest of her life, right? And so we had a heart-to-heart, a real sit-down, and chatted for about 2 hours just a few nights ago. And I didn't have a plan. I just wanted to see where she was at. And as we were talking, I recognized by the words she was using in reference to herself that most of her issues are limiting beliefs and what she actually believed about herself and her ability to do whatever it is that she wants to do in life. And so I talked to her about the reticular activating system. I pulled out that, and for listeners who have heard of it but aren't very familiar with it, or maybe you've not heard of it, you got to dig into this thing. And if you're interested, I'm happy to, I did a whole show on it on my podcast. I'm happy to send you a link you can post. But the reticular activating system is this powerful filter in the brain, and I won't go into it in great detail, that basically decides what we get in our conscious mind versus what we get in our subconscious mind. But the words we use are so incredibly powerful. And I told her, watch your mouth in reference to how you speak about yourself, because what you speak about yourself, your brain believes about you. And if you're not speaking power and success and capacity and capability, and you're speaking limiting things, your brain will limit you to those things.
You choose your future.
100%.
And your words are powerful.
Yep.
Especially the ones in your head. If people would like to learn more about you, the podcast, your store, your online, how do they find you?
So it's Vitality Nutrition is the brand of supplements that we sell. Most of them are sold directly through our website, vitalitynutrition.com, or our brick and mortar store here in Bountiful, Utah, called Vitality Nutrition. But we actually are branching out a little bit. I will tell you, we've made a decision not to sell on Amazon to make it easy to know that what you're getting from us is always authentic. And so you can't find us there, but you can find us a few other places. There's some local stores and practitioners that carry our brand. We have Vitality Radio podcast. And if you like the way I presented myself here, this is me on my podcast. It's the same thing. And what I try to do for people on the podcast is help you understand complex things about supplements to make you become a better, more informed consumer, so that when you are spending your supplement dollars, because nobody is going to tell you that any of this stuff is super cheap and easy to come by. We want you to spend your money wisely in this area. And I aim to help you figure out how to do that so that you can get the results that you're looking for. Because I believe that supplementation is an incredibly powerful tool. Clearly, Rocky, you do as well, based on your list of things that you take. It's a powerful tool if used wisely. And what I try to do on the podcast is help you with that. And then, of course, we talk about the emotional vitality stuff as well. And so those are the best places to find me. I'm also on Instagram at Vitality Nutrition Bountiful. And then I have a free ebook about endocrine disruption. My wife and I have been writing a full book on that topic, which we'll release later this year. But the ebook is a really good introductory to it to help you take control of your hormones. I call endocrine disruption the hidden epidemic, and the ebook is also called that. And you can jump on our website, and in exchange for your email, we'll send you the ebook.
Nice. And we'll make sure to put the website in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for checking out the full unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can get the full audio podcast with intro, outro, and a ton more details here on YouTube or whatever your favorite podcast player is. Don't forget, we've got hundreds of episodes for you to go back through, and you can also get episode information on the Richer Soul website as well. Don't forget to subscribe so you're automatically updated as to what's going on and every time we release a new episode. The first few episodes of the Richer Soul podcast actually lay out the entire framework that everything is built on over all of these years. So check them out as well. Thanks for listening.